Canucks Talk. I'm Noel Arneson. It is Saturday, February 1st, 2025, the day after JT Miller was traded to the New York Rangers, the day after the Canucks suffered a loss to the Dallas Stars and then immediately also flipped their first round pick from the Miller deal to the Pittsburgh Penguins, in which they acquired Marcus Pettersson and they trade Danton Heinen and Vincent Desharnais for that. So, probably going over my thoughts about the Miller trade, about the Marcus Pettersson trade for the Canucks, and a little bit maybe a recap of the game last night, how Pettersson looked when he was playing last night. So, obviously, Canucks acquire Philip Hedl, Victor Mancetti, and a first round pick from the Rangers, which they traded JT Miller, Eric Branson, and Jackson Dorrington to the Rangers. I think JT Miller, everyone loves him. I loved him. But I think, as Brendan Batchelor said, that this is addition by subtraction. I think that even though they were on a 3-game losing streak before the trade last, or 3-game winning streak before the game last night, that there was still a lot of noise in the room, and that Jim Rutherford interview might have caused a little bit more noise. Now, in that interview, he didn't say anything that most people didn't already know. I think it was more he was preparing Canucks fans for the outcome of what the trade was going to be. He knew that they probably were not going to get as much as Canucks fans hoped they would get for Miller if a Miller trade was going to happen. So I think he was just trying to prepare them. Now, Philip Hedl was a first-round pick for the Rangers in 2017. He is 25. I think he has high upside, but the head injuries do scare me. I think head injuries are always very serious, and he's had a couple. He only played 10 games last season with the Rangers, which, I mean, isn't for trading him. Yeah, he has a high upside, but do you trade a guy like JT Miller for him? And the Canucks pulled the trigger and did it, but I would have personally liked to see Lafreniere be the center part of that trade instead of Philip Hedl, because at least Lafreniere, is healthy. He doesn't have the head injuries. He doesn't have the injury history, and Lafreniere is just plagued by the Rangers. He's kind of buried in their second line, where everyone has seen what Capo Caco has been doing in Seattle and what he wasn't doing in New York. So I think the same could be for Hedl too. He could be freed up. He will be the second line center for the Canucks. And so maybe with the bigger responsibility, more playing time, that he can step it up, because his point totals for his career haven't been overly too pressing. Like, he's a 40 to 50 point guy so far in his career, which he has 11 goals already this year, which isn't overly too much, but a lot of Canucks haven't scored at all this year. Like, Jake DeBrusk has been on a long dry spell. Pettersson was like, the Canucks need more scoring, and if he can come and score even every third game, I think it would still be a win, because outside of Hughes right now, no one is really producing for the Canucks. Like, Pettersson's first game without Miller as the main guy, he 1 primary assist, 3 shots, 80.35 goals for. He was on ice for 16 of the shots, 3 against. On ice for 30 chances for the Canucks. On the ice for 14 chances against the Stars, and he was on ice for 17 scoring chances and 6 against, which overly isn't too bad. Like, he did play a decent game. I think we can still see a lot better than him, but we saw him actually lead like he was leading the play last night. Like we saw him driving into the Stars zone. Something we haven't really. I haven't seen a lot of zone entries from Pettersson this year, and to see him back trying to use his speed to enter opponent zones to create offense chances. Like he has always been really good at finding space, but now he has struggled with that this year. He's struggled with shooting the puck fast. Like he used to be able to. We always a lot of people remember two seasons ago, even start of last season, those one timers. You had two threats. You could have JT Miller on the left side, and he had that quick wrist shot or slap shot, and then you had Pettersson on the right side of the ice, and Pettersson would take that slap shot, and a lot of the time it would go in. But we haven't been seeing that, and so you have to wonder if like do the Canucks. If Pettersson starts performing, obviously he's going to stay, but if we don't see him performing, if he maxes out at 80 points this year, do the Canucks trade him before July 1st, before his no trade clause or no movement clause kicks in? Because at least then you get something for him, right? Because not that 80 points is bad, but 11.5 million for 80 points isn't ideal. Usually he got 11.5 million a season because of his 102-point season. And since that All-Star break last year, he's just been on the decline. But I was always on. I don't want there to be sides, but I was always leaning more towards Pettersson to stay over Miller because of the age. At least Pettersson is 26, and even if this is a down year for him, you always have the possibility that he rebounds because he's supposed to be in his prime. Where you see Miller, if Miller has a down year, you don't know if this is the start of the decline for him, right? Like he could just be a 60-point guy for the next couple of years before he declines even more. It's hard when they get into the 30s because they can have one down year and then rebound like nothing happened, and then they have a couple more good seasons. Or once they hit that decline, they start going down fast. Obviously, Miller was extremely good for the Canucks. 1.08 career points per game in a Canucks uniform. That's second in team history. Only Pavel Bure has more. Mind you, Pettersson is third on that list with 0.98. Hughes is 0.95. McGillney is 0.99. So Pettersson is up there. It's just up to him to continue to produce. So this upcoming lineup for the Canucks expected for their next home game would be DeBrusk, Pettersson, Besser, first line, Joshua, Hedel, Garland, second line, O'Connor, Suter, Sherwood, third line, Hoglander, Bluger, Ratu for the fourth line. I'm not sure. I don't think this might be going forward because Sherwood obviously is still on IR right now. And then Hughes, Myers, first pairing defense, Pettersson, Hronik, second pairing, and Forbert and Susie as third pairing. Obviously, I think personally for that defensive pairing, I would rather see DPD. I guess we can't really call him DPD anymore, but young PD, does that work? As on the third pairing, I haven't been a fan of taking him out for Juleson the last couple games. I like certain parts of Juleson's game, but I think you have to keep the young. We won the 3 games, where 2 games with him in the lineup. I don't think you should be taking out even in sheltered minutes, the better defenseman because you still have to shelter Juleson's minutes because he is not reliable to be playing those big minutes. And from that, Desharnais was decent at killing penalty kills, but the problem is that the reason why Desharnais got sent to Pittsburgh was because even though he was decent at killing penalties, he 9 times out of 10 found himself in the penalty box. He's averaging 4 to 6 penalty minutes a game. You can't have that, especially when you're not a player like Hughes. Not that you want Hughes to be in the box. No one wants the higher up players, but it might be a little bit more understandable if Hughes gets 1 or 2 penalties a game because he makes up for it in his offense, and you know that he will get you a goal or again a primary assist for a goal. Where Desharnais has little to no offensive production, so him just being in the box was not helping this team whatsoever. But going back to the whole Miller thing, the addition by subtraction. Obviously, last night's game, the Canucks lost, but I do think that in terms of the locker room, it is getting better now. I think there's been reports that a couple players aren't happy about the Miller trade, but most of them in their interviews last night after the game said that there has been a lot of noise in that locker room this season, and now that a move has finally been made, that it's time to just look forward. And although it sucks that Miller's gone, hopefully there is less noise in that locker room, and now they can just move forward as a team, start putting some wins together. If you're in the right spot still by the deadline, I think they only have 4. We'll see if there's going to be a move soon as well, because there's only 4 more games until the break for Four Nations. So we'll see if we'll have an idea of what this lineup will look like before the Four Nations going forward. And if the Canucks find themselves still in the second wild card spot, I know Calgary passed them yesterday or the day before. In the standing, they're 1 point ahead of them. But if the Canucks find themselves in the third wild card or in the third spot in the Pacific, because the Kings have kind of been on a downhill slope right now, by trading the Miller contract, they've freed up some cap space. They're expected to have, I think it is $12.5 million by the trade deadline, which is actually a substantial amount. They can add someone. Like they freed up $3.5 million by that Miller trade. But you have to resign. Like, I know there's the whole thing about Zadorov, but you can't, because you already traded your first round pick for Marcus Pettersson. He's a UFA. Same with O'Connor is a UFA at the end of the year. So you have to resign Besser. Unless they trade Besser, you have to resign O'Connor now. You have to resign Pettersson now. That's going to take, all 3 of those will be way more than $12.5 million combined. So are they just going to get a rental when they're not even really serious contenders for the Cup this year? And I don't think they should add. Ultimately, I think for those reasons that we saw them get rentals in Zadorov and Lindholm last year, and they tried re-signing Zadorov. He ultimately chose Boston instead. It would have been nice. Lindholm was just asking for too much too. That's why he left. But you can't keep trading prospects and picks for rentals when you're not that serious of contenders. Obviously, last season was a lot different for the Canucks. They're first in the Pacific. They looked like a completely different team than they do this year. So it worked out last year. The Canucks got to Game 7 of the second round against the Oilers. They were one goal away from the Western Conference Finals. But this year they're fighting for the second wildcard spot. So I don't think it's not worth it to trade away future assets when you're going to need those future assets because of how these seasons are going. Like, the Canucks need to see the development of Tom Willander and DPD to improve substantially over the next season or two because they need them in the lineup as soon as possible because the Canucks have been struggling defensively a lot this season, and although this Marcus Pettersson trade frees, like, not frees up, but it makes their top four better than what it is before, it's still not an ideal top four. I think you still want, in a season or two, you still want to see probably Tom Willander on that second pairing and DPD on the third pairing. That's kind of the ideal, what you want. It's just you can't be adding guys and doing that. So going back to the Miller trade and the Penguins trade, did the Canucks win the Miller trade? Probably not. But you're always gonna lose the better player in the trade. Like, you're gonna always lose the trade if you're giving away the better player. It's just that this can help the Canucks in other ways. Obviously, a lot of their mental health could be better in the locker room. So you get Pettersson, who should now be happy. Like, you gave Pettersson what he wanted, so now he should be happy about it. You free up $3.5 million in cap space, which, like I said, could help re-sign Besser, could help sign Marcus Pettersson and O'Connell. But you're still giving away a 100-point center, like 437 points in a Canucks jersey for Miller. That's 11th in team history. I think in terms of going to the Penguins trade for Marcus Pettersson, the Canucks, I feel, overpaid. Obviously, there is a high price you have to pay for top four defensemen in the league right now. Like, no defenseman's going to be cheap to acquire. Like, took a first round pick to acquire Hronek, and Hronek's obviously better than Marcus Pettersson. There's no doubt about it. But for Marcus Pettersson, he is not worth a first round pick. A second round pick, maybe, yeah. But you gave up more to the Penguins than you acquired. Danton Heinen, sure, he wasn't producing, and he should be traded, yes. Vincent Desharnais should be traded. He was not what Canucks fans thought he was going to be. And to be fair, Desharnais got exposed in the playoffs last year. We saw how he looked against the Canucks. I'm not sure why fans had their expectations up high about them or why management thought he was going to be something that he wasn't. He got exposed in the playoffs last year, so yes, he should go as well. But to give up that conditional first-round pick, it's not worth it. So, like, if you go back, January 26, 2022, Patrick Allvin was hired by Jim Rutherford and the Canucks. January 30th, 2023, Horvat was traded to the Islanders. January 31st, 2024, Elias Lindholm was acquired by the Canucks. And January 31st, 2025, Miller was traded to the Rangers. So Alvin likes to make moves at the end of January, but I think he pulled the trigger too fast on the Pettersson trade. I think obviously he knows more. He's been talking to teams for weeks, months now. But you don't know what you can until you for sure get that first round pick. You don't know what's out there on the market. You don't know if you might be able to acquire someone else, right? So for him to flip it an hour later, I think is short-sighted, but he might have had this planned up. He might have contacted other teams and said, "Look, I'm getting a first-round pick from the Rangers this year. Who can I acquire on defense?" And if most teams are saying, "Oh no, you have to include Wallander or DPD," then yeah, this was probably the right move to make. But I think you at least wait a couple days because the Canucks have the next couple days off. They're on their way back home from Dallas to Vancouver, so it's not like they were playing today like on a back to back or something. I think Alvin had a couple days to make a move, like to call around the league and see what there was, but he he didn't. An hour after the game, so 4 or 5 hours after the Miller trade, I think it was 5 hours. The first round pick was already traded, and Marcus Pettersson is coming in as a Canuck now, where like if if you're gonna trade it, then trade it. But just I think he should have waited. Um, so you see like the cap for the next couple seasons, you have 2025, 2026. The cap is supposed to raise to 95.5 million. 26, 27, the cap's supposed to raise to 104 million, and in 2027, 28, the cap is supposed to raise to 113.5 million. So once you get to 2027, 28, that's gonna be a substant like Pettersson's contract really won't be that high of a contract. It'll be a steal if he's continuing to produce at 90 to 100 points each year, and I think it was worth. It's going to be worth 9% of the Canucks cap by that point if it goes up to that much. Which Pettersson at 11.5 make producing 100 points per year, only taking up 9% of the cap. It's not a bad deal. Where Miller's was going to be, I think it was 7% of the cap, which then that eats up 20 or just under 20% of the cap. Talking about the cap though, the Canucks not retaining any money on the JT Miller deal is actually huge because they already have $5.2 million in dead money. So you also have to look at that part of the trade. Is a lot of teams that the whole Frank Saravalli said the whole reason the JT Miller trade fell through last time with the Rangers a couple weeks ago was the Canucks and the Rangers had actually agreed on a trade. The Rangers went to the owner, said, "We have pulled the trigger on Miller." And then the Rangers owner reportedly wasn't happy about that because Miller will be aging. So then it ended up that the Canucks had to add Brandstrom. But the Rangers knew that Miller's contract isn't going to age well. That's why they had to get someone back. So for the Canucks to retain zero money on the Miller deal is actually big, like huge, because a lot of teams were asking for the Canucks to retain money on the Miller deal. So from that standpoint, the Canucks might have won because we'll see in a season or two if JT Miller is producing still from on the Rangers. Because if he isn't, then that contract is the Canucks. If the Canucks will win it if JT Miller stops producing and he does fall off in terms of his production, because he is turning 32 in March, which normally players fall off around 32, 33. They end up on their decline. Now, in switching up to Quinn Hughes, uh, 8-game point streak now, I believe. NHLPA Player of the Week. He is now, for most multi-point games in 2024-25, he is now, what was that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 in the league. Draisaitl, McKinnon, Marner, Eichel, and McDavid are only ahead of him. McDavid, he's actually tied with McDavid. He has 20 multi-point games. Leon Draisaitl leagues with 26. McKinnon 23, Marner 23, and Eichel at 21. And I think one of the big things is if you trade Pettersson and Besser leave, you're essentially entering a rebuild, right? You're going to see Hughes leave if you trade Besser and Pettersson. Because why would Hughes want to stick through another rebuild? He's already been here for most of his career, which has been a rebuild. And Rutherford acknowledged that himself, that if they enter a rebuild, Hughes is as good as gone. He is going to leave probably to New Jersey to join his brothers. And that's if New Jersey can afford him. He might end up on a different team. But most people think that it would be New Jersey just because why wouldn't he go to New Jersey if his brothers are there and the Canucks are entering a rebuild? But you have to. I like that they made the move because you have to make a move because you don't want to waste Quinn Hughes' remaining years on the deal. Like Quinn Hughes is in his prime right now. He is the best, if not the second best defenseman in the NHL, in my opinion. And he has single-handedly kept them in the wild card race this year. Like all of the team's success is because of him. Also, Lankinen has way outperformed his contract too, but Hughes will always outperform his contract, the current one he is on. Like his contract is up in 2 years, and he's gonna get a substantial raise, and it's gonna be one of the highest in the NHL for sure. Like it's probably 15 million, probably between 14 and 15 million. Talking about raises, when you look at the Rantanen trade compared to the Miller trade, Colorado did actually not get that much for Rantanen because the rumors were Rantanen was asking for $14.5 million per season, which would make him the highest paid player in the NHL. And Colorado's actually, like Joe Sakic is really good just saying, no, he's not worth $14.5 million and just moving on immediately. Just trade. Oh, yeah, he's not worth that and trade him, right? And Rantanen is more, like he's a better goal scorer than JT Miller. He's won a Stanley Cup. There's Rantanen is a superstar in this league, and it's not saying that JT Miller isn't a superstar, but Rantanen is younger. There was no drama with Rantanen either, right? There wasn't all this talk, oh, Rantanen doesn't like McKinnon or whatever. No, there was none. It was Rantanen and the Avalanche weren't agreeing on how much he was worth for a contract, so the Avs traded him. And so Rantanen was near close to what his full value should be, and Avalanche didn't get that much too. So you have to look at what the Canucks got for Miller. Then it's like, okay, that's not a bad return then, because, well, if Colorado's only getting not that much for Rantanen, why are the Canucks, like, what's the Canucks going to look like if they trade Miller? And now we see that the Canucks got a first-round pick, and they flipped it. They got Philip Hedl, who has a ton of potential if he can stay healthy and not get injured, where Natchez, he's not he's not been ideal for Colorado. Like he was -3 in his Avs debut, which I think Natchez is a product of Svechnikov. Like I don't think Natchez is like a superstar that can lift players up on his own. So he's not he's a really good player, but I don't think he can make players better than they actually are. Where I think Rantanen can do that, and we've seen Rantanen has been pretty good for the Canes already. So we'll see what Philip Hedl brings to the Canucks, and if he can stay healthy and actually break out per se, and put up a solid amount of points, then it's gonna be a win because he's only 25 and Miller's 32, and if they're gonna be similar point totals, well, Hedl makes less money, he's younger, and he's producing the same. So you're gonna get more prime years out of Hedl if he can stay healthy than you are Miller at this point. And that's the same thing with Pettersson. Why I think it was smart to keep Pettersson over Miller is you're gonna Pettersson is he's only 26, right? Pettersson is nowhere near decline. Like unless he really gets injured and it's ending or career altering, Pettersson has at least 6, 7 more really good years. Like because he's 26, right? So if they add 7 or whatever, 6 until he's Miller's age, Miller has 2, if that. And that's if Pettersson can play longer. Like we've seen, if Pettersson can stay like the Sedins, then he honestly might have another 8 or 9 solid seasons. And it's a way better risk to take for the younger player than it is the older player. And that's ultimately the smarter move is I think you always take the risk on the younger player because you're gonna get more prime years out of him. And so that's just the way it is, right? Like addition by subtraction. You have your star center who's finally he's finally happy. He said it himself. He wants to be in those tough matchups. Like I believe if I can find it here, it was in the Dan Murphy interview, post game, and it was Murph asked him about that, and he didn't really say much. He just said it's sad to see Miller go, something like that. But he wants to be playing the big minutes in those tough matchups. That's what he said that he's happy about now. And so if Pettersson wants to play in those tough matchups, he wants to be the first line lockdown center where he's up against McDavid. He's up against Matthews, or not Matthews, or he wants to be up against Crosby. He wants to be up against McKinnon. He wants to be up against like guys like Point and Kucherov or whoever, like against the top lines. Then he is being granted that. So now it's up to him, like I said before, to produce. Because if he says he wants those matchups, but then ultimately can't handle those matchups, then maybe the trade doesn't look as good. But you don't know until you give him those tough matchups. Until you give him half a season of no Miller, of him being the first line center. Because we haven't really seen, other than really Miller's time off, the entire time Pettersson's been here, Miller's also been here, so we haven't really seen Pettersson without Miller in the lineup in some form. So we saw last November or whatever when Miller took his personal leave that Pettersson stepped up and was producing. And so if he can, that road trip that they had with Miller on leave, if Pettersson can continue doing that every single night without Miller in that, then Canucks win this deal 10 times out of 10 because you made your star player happy. He's producing better and he's younger. So it's tough because of Pettersson might not appeal to some because the way JT Miller played is that JT Miller's a heart and soul guy, right? Who you notice him when he's on the ice. He is throwing around his body. He is getting scrums. He's doing this and that. And like we see, Pettersson throws around his body a fair amount, but JT Miller, one of the things I loved about him, and we saw it in that game against the Blues, he took the challenge against Brayden Schenn right off the faceoff, dropped the gloves. Pettersson will never do that, and granted, they're different playing styles. Pettersson is a skill forward where JT Miller is more of a power forward that has a really high scoring touch, who's drives the play. It's not. They're different playing styles, so you can't compare in that way. But you also lose a huge amount of the physicality in this Canucks lineup, losing Miller. Who's gonna protect Hughes? And not that Miller was protecting him every single night, but you don't. You lose a whole bunch of grit. You lose physicality because now Sherwood is out of the lineup, so you're losing the league's hit leader. Joshua hasn't been playing to the same level that he was last year, and you can't put that on Joshua. Like going through cancer and the couple injuries he's had this season, that's not his fault. So, but he's not playing to the same physicality level he was last year. And then on defense, not having Zadorov there, you don't have a big man who really lays the body, right? So sometimes you see Myers lay it, oftentimes you don't. Hughes is offensive defenseman, right? You're not going to see him lay the body. Zadorov occasionally does, but like he's also like Hughes. He's an offensive defenseman most of the time. Marcus Pettersson now, I haven't seen him in a lot of fights, so I don't know if he sticks up for teammates. I've seen him hit. He's decent at it, but I don't know how often he chooses to do so, as I don't watch every single Penguins game. I don't watch them that much. Forbert occasionally does. Like, it's kind of hard for him. It's the same reason Juleson likes to try and lay the body as well. But the thing with Forbert and Juleson is they're both on the slower side. So if they both miss the hit or they get reverse hit, then they're SOL, right? Like there is no one to protect them or save them, right? Where if you have someone like Zadorov, who by no means was Zadorov fast. He was quick and burst, but he's not faster than a lot of the top forwards in the NHL. But he was at least big enough that he could still phase them out if he kind of missed. If not, like, he was willing to fight. And Forbert, no one on this Canucks team, I really think, is willing to drop the gloves if they need to for Hughes. Maybe Joshua. Or we saw Suter try, and obviously Corey Perry just kind of blew him off and got him the draw penalty. But Suter's not big enough to fight. Suter's probably losing the fight, losing most fights that he is in, just because he's a smaller forward. You need JT Miller was, what was he? just about 6 foot or something like that, but solid, like a solid build, right? Like he can throw around his strength where I don't think a guy like Suter has as much strength as Miller, as much punching force, as much as that. There's no one really on the Canucks other than maybe Joshua who can really get in a fight and have a decent chance of winning the fight. And then Carson Soucy, you don't. Carson Soucy is. I don't think he's not getting any fights. He's wildly inconsistent for the Canucks. Like he'll go on runs where he's a really good, solid defenseman for the Canucks, and then for about a month, he'll be the worst defenseman. He'll be worse than Myers. He'll be the worst defenseman on the team. Like you're like, oh god, Juleson looks better than this guy, which isn't. You can't often say that, right? Like, but going over the two trades from yesterday, the Canucks won in terms of they got rid of Miller without retaining anything. They got a first round pick back. They flipped that first round pick immediately to address something they need desperately, which was another defenseman for the top four. They got back a second line center in Philip Hedl, and although he's not really broken out yet, like he's just been, I think his career high is under 50 points or just above 50 points, something like that. He could have the chance to break out. And so Hedl's on a 40-point pace for the season right now, which isn't. I wouldn't say you want your second line center, to be producing 40 points this season. I think you want your second line center to be more in the 70 to 85 point range. But in terms of the Canucks winning, yeah, they won. Depends who you ask. I think a lot of Canucks fans are upset about the return for Miller, the giving up the first round pick for Pettersson, but only time will tell for how Alvin has made these trades. Like he's not afraid if he's messed up. He's not afraid to go make a trade to admit he was messed up, right? He's traded 3 of his July 1st signings in Darnay, Sprong, and Heinen already, which he admitted that, or he didn't admit, but trading them, he now knows 2020 vision that they weren't good signings, and that's at least something that Benning wouldn't have done. I think Benning would have traded away a July 1st signing that he knew he messed up on, and obviously, like, you can look at like Louis Eriksson or Jay Beagle or Antoine Roussel, and being like those were all atrocious signings. Like they're all overpaid, and Benning did nothing. And granted, they were hard to move contracts. You weren't giving up those contracts without retaining money, without doing something. But Benning really never even tried to trade them, or at least at least Alvin was like, has done something to try. He at least tries to improve this team's roster, which more than Benning did. He's not, which I like, but there's only time will tell at this point on whether the Canucks succeed or not, if Alvin's moves will pay off. And if they don't, then Obviously, vision is 2020, so you have to hope that they they do pay off, and if not, like, you still have to see what you get for Pettersson, but hopefully he lives up and produces. If not, we'll find out tomorrow, February 2nd, against the Detroit Red Wings at home, if what Filipino will look like in a Canucks uniform, what Marcus Pettersson will look like in a Canucks uniform, what O'Connor will provide and look like, and see this new revised Canucks team following two huge trades for them yesterday. So that's it, guys. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned for the next podcast, which will be coming out next week. And yeah, enjoy the week.